So I'm working this late shift at the bar one night. Pretty standard crowd, nothing out of the ordinary. It's close to midnight, and everyone's either having a good time or just getting that glazed over look after one too many. That's when I spot this guy at the corner of the bar. He's kind of off, just sitting alone, barely talking to anyone, watching everything. I mean, that's not entirely weird for a bar, but there's something unsettling about the way he's doing it. It's like he's not even part of the crowd, he's just observing, like he's looking for something. Anyway, I keep an eye on him, but I've got a lot of people to serve, so I'm running around, keeping busy. I start making a cocktail for this group of friends, turning my back for only a second, and when I turn back around, I see that same guy leaning over someone's drink. I mean, leaning in close, like he's messing with it. I've worked in bars long enough to know the signs of someone up to no good, and something about this just clicks all my instincts into overdrive. I try to stay calm, and I walk over casually, acting like I didn't just see him practically trying to slip something in her glass. "Hey, everything all right here?" I ask, trying to keep my tone light but firm. The guy just looks up at me, completely unfazed, like he's already thought through exactly how he's gonna react. He doesn't even flinch, just gives me this slow, unsettling grin. "Oh yeah, all good," he says, but his eyes, they're dead. No humor, no charm, just this empty stare that feels like it's cutting right through me. He straightens up and mutters something, but I'm too rattled to even catch it. The girl whose drink he was tampering with looks at me, confused, and I quietly tell her to order something else and to keep an eye on her drink. She looks freaked out, but she nods and moves back to her friends, thankfully oblivious to the full weirdness of the situation. Now, I'm stuck, wondering what to do. I mean, I could call security or tell him to leave, but I'm suddenly very aware of how he's staring at me. He doesn't leave. He just goes back to his seat and orders another drink as if nothing happened. Every few minutes I catch him looking at me, and it's this cold, unblinking gaze that makes me feel like I'm the one under scrutiny. I start to feel like I'm the one in danger here. So closing time finally rolls around, and I'm relieved when he heads out without a fuss. I breathe a sigh of relief, thinking maybe he was just trying to mess with me. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time I'd had to deal with creeps in this job. But as I'm cleaning up, my stomach sinks. I see him through the bar's front window. He's standing outside, just waiting. I try to ignore it, finish my tasks as quickly as I can, hoping he'll get bored and leave. But every time I glance out there, he's still there, staring straight at the door. There's this sick feeling in my gut, and I decide to wait it out, thinking he'll eventually give up. But it's been almost 30 minutes and he hasn't budged an inch. I start to realize he's not going anywhere. So I call one of my coworkers who was on an earlier shift, ask him to come back and walk me to my car. While I'm waiting, I keep looking out, and this guy is just motionless, almost statue-like. It's eerie. I'm starting to feel trapped, like there's nowhere to go that he won't see me. When my coworker finally arrives, the guy outside shifts a little, but he doesn't leave. He just turns to look at us both, like he's sizing up my coworker now too. My friend walks me out, trying to make light conversation, probably to distract me, but all I can think about is that guy. He's watching me the entire way to my car, his eyes tracking every step, that same unsettling smile creeping back onto his face. As we get to my car, my coworker mutters, "Creepy as hell, man, let's just go." I don't need any more encouragement. I jump into my car and we drive off. But the whole way, I'm paranoid, checking my rearview mirror constantly. I don't see him following, but that doesn't bring much comfort. Over the next few days, I kept seeing him in random places, the grocery store near my apartment building, and even at a coffee shop I go to before my shifts. He's not doing anything, just lurking, watching. Every time I spot him, he just stares, with that same unnerving smile, as if he's amused by how uncomfortable he's making me. Finally, I decided to confront him. I mean, maybe he's just trying to scare me and will back off if I call him out. So one night I walk up to him outside my apartment building, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" He just smiles, that dead, empty smile that never reaches his eyes. "Just wanted to make sure you remembered me," he says with a hint of amusement. Then he leans in, close enough that I can smell his cologne, and whispers, You didn't stop me from what I came to do." And then just like that, he turns and walks away, like he's had his fun. I stand there, frozen, replaying his words, trying to make sense of it, but there's nothing. No explanation, no closure, just that creeping horror that he's still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. I don't know what he meant, and I'm not sure I want to. I only know that from that night on, I kept a knife under my pillow, checked every lock, every night, and still never felt safe. It's been months, and I haven't seen him again, but it's like he left a mark on me. This paranoia, this sense that he's always just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to come back. It was a typical Friday night, the kind of busy where you barely have a moment to breathe. The bar was packed, music blaring, people laughing and talking over each other. I was in my zone, pouring drinks, cracking jokes, doing my usual routine. But then I spotted him, a guy in a police uniform standing near the entrance. Now, cops swing by sometimes, you know? Check on things, make sure the crowd's not getting too rowdy. But this guy, something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. He was young, maybe early 30s, but had this weird, over-friendly vibe, like he was trying too hard, and instead of staying by the entrance or talking to security, he was wandering around, eyeing people up. I didn't think much of it at first, kept pouring drinks, doing my thing. But then he started approaching customers, asking to see their IDs. At first, I figured he was just checking if they were of age, maybe trying to bust someone for a fake ID. But he wasn't asking everyone, just certain people. Mostly women, actually. And it wasn't in any official kind of way. He'd lean in close, all friendly, sometimes even touching their shoulder like he knew them. After a while, he came up to the bar, flashed a smile at me, and asked for a water. I got him one, just trying to keep things cool, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whole time he was scanning the room, like he was looking for someone specific. Then out of nowhere, he starts escorting people out. He'd pick one person, ask them to follow him, and lead them out through the back. At first, I thought maybe he'd caught someone doing something illegal, but he didn't seem to be arresting anyone, just leading them away, one by one. And each time he'd come back in, calm as anything, and start scoping out the crowd again. Something inside me just started screaming that this wasn't right. I went over to my manager, quietly pulled him aside, and told him what I was seeing. He glanced over at the officer, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "That guy doesn't look familiar," he muttered, which was weird because we all knew the local cops by now. We decided to do a little digging. My manager went into the back to call the police station and verify if they'd sent anyone. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on our mystery cop. By now, he'd found another target, a young woman sitting alone, waiting for her friends. He leaned down, talking to her with this weird, overly friendly smile, and she looked uncomfortable, glancing around as if she didn't know what to do. I walked over, pretending to clean up nearby, and caught a bit of their conversation. He was telling her that there had been some reports of suspicious activity in the area, and that he needed to ask her a few questions outside. She seemed hesitant, looking around like she was hoping someone would step in. That's when I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, you all right?" The guy looked at me, his smile fading just a bit. "It's fine," he said a little too firmly, "just routine questioning." But I wasn't buying it. "Funny," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, "because we didn't get a heads up about any police checks tonight." He gave me a hard look, and for a second I swear I thought he was going to snap. But then he just plastered that smile back on and said, "Just doing my job." Right then, my manager came back out, his face pale. He pulled me aside and whispered, "I called the station. They didn't send anyone." That was all I needed to hear. I walked straight up to the guy and said, "I think you need to leave." The room went quiet, a few people watching us, sensing the tension. The guy stared at me, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't argue. He just turned and started walking toward the door. But as he passed, he leaned in close to me, so close I could feel his breath on my ear, and whispered, "You have no idea what you just did." And then he was gone, disappearing into the night before we could stop him. We called the real cops after that, gave them a description and told them everything. But by the time they got there, he was long gone. They checked the security footage, took our statements, but they didn't sound too optimistic about catching him. They said he probably wasn't even a real cop, just someone who'd bought a uniform online and decided to play a twisted game. For weeks after that, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking somewhere, watching me with that dead-eyed smile. I'll never forget that night, or the feeling that somehow he wasn't done, that he'd be back looking for someone else to escort out into the darkness. Alright, so this happened a few months back, and I still get chills just thinking about it. I was working a late shift, closing up after what felt like an endless night. You know how it goes. Half the customers barely make it out the door on their own, and then there's always one last straggler who just won't take the hint. This time, it was a guy I didn't recognize, but he seemed harmless enough at first. Mid-30s, kinda scruffy, like he'd been out all night. He was nursing his drink, quiet, keeping to himself, so I didn't pay him much attention. But the clock was ticking and I was ready to wrap up, so I went over and told him we were closing. "Just finishing up," he said, giving me this tired smile. But something about his eyes, I don't know, they seemed a little too intense, like he was reading into me or something. I did my usual closing routine, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, but every time I glanced over, he was still there, swirling his drink slowly, watching me like he had nowhere else to be. It was just us by then. The other bartenders had already left, and it was dead quiet. I kept trying to hint that it was time to go, flipping lights, grabbing my bag, locking up bottles behind the bar, but he just stayed put. Finally, I decided to be direct. "Hey, we're closed, man. You need to head out." That's when he smiled, a slow, creepy kind of smile. He didn't get up, didn't even budge. He just looked at me and said, "What's the rush?" "We've got all night." My stomach did this little flip, and suddenly I was very aware of how empty the place was, how isolated it felt. I forced a laugh, trying to keep it light, but he could tell I was tense. He leaned back, stretching his arms across the bar like he owned the place. I walked over to the front door, figuring I'd just open it and, motion for him to leave. But when I grabbed the handle, it wouldn't budge. I looked down, and sure enough, the lock was engaged. Now I know for a fact I didn't lock that door. I always leave it unlocked until I'm ready to walk out myself. I turned back, trying to play it cool, but he was already standing up, a little too close for comfort. "Door's locked, huh?" he murmured, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "Guess you're stuck with me now." I felt my pulse race, my hands clenching without even thinking about it. I kept my tone casual, though my voice shook just a bit. "All right, joke's over. I need you to leave." He just stared, that smile never fading. "Oh, come on. I thought we were just getting to know each other. Don't you like your job? All alone, after hours. Seems like you're into this." My heart was pounding, and every instinct in my body screamed to run. But he was blocking the way to the door, and there was no other way out except the back, which was always locked from the outside. I took a small step back, trying not to let him see the panic in my eyes. Then he reached into his jacket, and I swear I thought he was pulling out a weapon. But instead he pulled out his phone and started typing something. I didn't dare take my eyes off him. Not for a second. Finally he looked up, holding the phone toward me. "Smile," he said, and snapped a photo. That was it for me. I bolted behind the bar, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, a bottle of whiskey, fingers gripping the neck so tight I thought I'd break it. He laughed, not even flinching. "Oh, now you're gonna play rough? I didn't think you had it in you." I felt trapped, completely helpless, but I kept my voice steady. "If you don't leave right now, I'll call the cops." He tilted his head, like he was considering it. Then he put his hands up, all mock innocence. All right, no need to get violent." But instead of heading toward the door, he stepped back, locking eyes with me as he slowly reached out and twisted the lock on the door himself. "Just remember," he said, voice low, "I know where you work." And then he walked out, whistling, like this was all some sick game. I stood there, hands shaking, barely able to breathe until I heard the lock click behind him. I grabbed my phone, checking for his photo, but it wasn't there. Nothing he'd done seemed to have left a trace. Ever since that night, every time I work a late shift, I catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking around, waiting for last call. So imagine this. It's a packed Friday night. The bar is buzzing, music thumping, people laughing, drinks flowing. I'm behind the bar, pouring shots, cracking jokes, trying to keep up with orders flying in left and right. We're at full capacity and the energy is wild. Should have been a fun night, right? Well, that's when things went south. Just as I'm reaching for a bottle, the lights cut out. Complete blackout. Everything just stops. Mid-laugh, mid-song, mid-sip. The place goes from chaos to dead silence in a split second. And all I can hear are people muttering, "What the hell?" and nervous laughs floating through the dark. You'd think someone had just flipped the off switch on the entire bar. At first I laugh it off, figuring someone tripped a breaker or something. I shout, "Hang tight, folks!" But I can't see a damn thing. Not the people around me, not even my own hand in front of my face. The emergency lights didn't come on and it's pitch black, the kind of darkness that makes your skin crawl. And then, I feel it. Someone brushes past me. Close. Like way too close for a crowded bar. It's subtle, but I feel this hand, first just brushing against my arm, then gripping my side for a split second. I whip around, but of course I can't see anything. I think it's one of my coworkers or maybe a customer who lost their balance. But before I can make sense of it, I hear this whisper. Right in my ear, like someone leaning in, lips almost grazing my cheek. It's so soft, like they're trying to be quiet but close enough that I can feel their breath. I can't make out what they're saying. It's more like a mumble, almost chanting, a sound that sends shivers down my spine. And then I feel another hand. This time it's rougher, pressing against my back, and before I can react, it's gone. Like whoever it was slipped back into the darkness. I freeze, heart racing, trying to figure out what's going on. I want to shout, call out for help, but my voice catches in my throat. It's like I'm paralyzed. More whispers. Close. Too close. They feel like they're coming from everywhere around me. And then, another brush against my side. Someone's fingers trailing along my arm before vanishing. I'm spinning in the dark, trying to keep track of what's happening, but it's impossible. There's no one there, and yet there's definitely someone there. And then, thank God, the lights flicker back on. The entire bar lights up, the music cuts back in, and I can finally see. I'm looking around, wide-eyed, expecting to find someone standing right there next to me. But nothing. Just the usual crowd. People laughing, talking like nothing happened. The energy picks right back up, like the blackout was just a hiccup. But I'm standing there, frozen, completely rattled. My coworkers come over, asking if I'm okay, and I just nod, trying to shake it off. But I can still feel where those hands were, that rough grip on my back, the fingers that brushed down my arm. It was real, I know it was. And those whispers, they're still echoing in my head, even though I couldn't understand a word. Alright, so this one night I'm working a late shift at the bar. It's nearing last call and the place is thinning out, leaving just a few lingering customers, mostly the rowdy types who won't take the hint to go home. There's this group of guys near the back booth. They've been drinking pretty heavily, laughing way too loud, you know the type. Usually I'd ignore it, but tonight something felt off. As I'm cleaning up the bar, I hear snatches of their conversation. They're talking about a bet. Normally I'd tune it out, but one of them lowers his voice and suddenly I hear my name. That's enough to make me freeze, hands mid-wipe on a glass. Think they go for it? One of them mutters, glancing toward me. Nah, no way, too smart for that, but if we push it? Another one laughs, and it's not a friendly laugh. More like they're talking about a prank or something, but there's an edge to it. Then, the biggest guy of the group, some guy with a beard down to his chest, leans back and looks right at me, like he's sizing me up. I try to stay calm, brushing it off as drunk talk. But as the clock ticks closer to closing, they don't move. The place empties out, but they're still there watching me. I can feel their eyes following me every time I walk past. When I finally announce last call, they ignore me, just waving their glasses in the air like they own the place. I'm getting this sinking feeling, but I'm stuck. Gotta finish my shift. Finally, I walk over and tell them we're closed. They look at each other, smirking. The bearded guy leans forward, voice low. "How about a little wager, huh?" His tone's playful, but his eyes, dead serious. "We got a bet going on if you can. Make it out back with us without losing your nerve." I laugh it off, hoping they'll take the hint. Nah, I've got enough bets going with myself just getting through the night. But they don't drop it. One of them scoots out of the booth, practically blocking my path. "Oh, come on, we're just trying to have a little fun." I feel my heart pick up. The bar's empty. It's just me and them. I try to step back, but they fan out, surrounding me. I'm not even sure what they're betting on at this point, but the way they're looking at me, it feels like they're testing how far they can push before I break. "Look, I think it's time you guys head out," I say, trying to keep my voice steady. They just laugh. The big guy leans in, his face way too close, and I catch a whiff of stale beer on his breath. "It's just a game," he says, almost whispering. "Don't be a coward." My hands are clenched at my sides. I'm standing there trying to keep my cool, but inside I'm panicking. I don't want to end up out back with them or figure out what game they're talking about. Just then I spot the security camera above the bar. I don't know if it's actually recording, but I look right at it and say, loud enough for it to pick up, "All right, fellas, the place is closed. Time to call it a night." There's a pause, the guys exchanging glances. One of them, the quietest of the group, shifts nervously. "Come on, man," he mutters to his friend. "Let's go. This is stupid." The tension breaks. They grumble, cussing under their breath, but finally they shuffle out the door. I watch them through the window until they're down the street, heart pounding like crazy. I don't know what would have happened if they'd gone through with their bet. But I do know this: next time I hear anyone mention a wager around here, I'm calling backup. I had just closed up for the night, locking the front door, finally ready to leave when I heard it. A sharp crack like glass breaking coming from the back storage area. At first I thought maybe it was something falling off a shelf or a broken bottle, but this was different. This was deliberate. I froze, my hand on my phone, not even sure if I should call anyone yet. I was alone, and every shadow in that empty bar suddenly felt alive. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps moving through the back hallway where we kept the liquor in storage. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure anyone within a mile could hear it. I debated just bolting out the front door, but something kept me rooted in place. Call it shock or stupidity, but I stayed there, gripping my phone, waiting. The footsteps grew closer, creeping along as if the person was taking their time. They weren't in any hurry. I slipped behind the bar, ducking down, peeking out just enough to watch the hallway. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I didn't want to make a sound, but I also didn't want to sit there completely defenseless. I kept trying to convince myself to call the police, but I was terrified he'd hear the click of the buttons. Just then the footsteps stopped, dead silent. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign of movement. I couldn't see the back hallway from where I was hiding, but I could sense him there, just out of sight, listening, maybe wondering if anyone was around. Suddenly I heard something scrape across the floor. I couldn't see what he was doing, but I had this awful image of him dragging something heavy. I gripped the handle of a nearby wine opener, the only weapon I had within reach, though I knew it wouldn't do much against whatever might be out there. Then he started muttering. Just this low, barely audible whisper, like he was talking to himself. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to send a chill down my spine. I could tell he was moving again, slowly, methodically, coming toward the bar. I pressed myself as close to the cabinets as I could, feeling like a trapped animal with nowhere to go. As he approached, he paused again. I could just make out the sound of him breathing, heavy, labored breaths that echoed slightly against the walls. My mind was racing, playing out scenarios, each one worse than the last. I wanted to bolt, to make a run for the door, but every inch of my body felt locked in place. Finally, I heard him step into the main bar area, just out of my line of sight. All it would take was one more step and he'd see me. I shut my eyes, half waiting for him to grab me, to yank me out from behind the bar. But instead, he stopped. I could feel him standing there just a few feet away, still breathing that heavy, ragged breath. And then he spoke, low and eerie, like he was speaking to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "I know you're here. I can feel it." My blood ran cold. I wanted to scream, to do anything but sit there in silence, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat felt tight, like I was choking on my own fear. He took a step forward, his boots scuffing against the floor, and then another. My mind was screaming at me to move, to run, but I stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. He circled the bar, pausing now and then like he was taking in every detail. I saw his shadow stretching over me, long and ominous, and I bit down hard, hoping he wouldn't actually look down. After what felt like an eternity, he moved toward the cash register, rummaging around, taking his time. The sounds of his hands rifling through the drawers, the click of the register, every tiny noise felt magnified, echoing through the empty bar. My eyes darted to the front door. I didn't know if I could make it out without him seeing me, but I knew this was my best chance. He was distracted, and I had to move now or risk him catching me. I clutched my phone, pulling myself up slowly, inching toward the edge of the bar, keeping my movements small and silent. Just when I thought I was in the clear, I heard his footsteps, coming back around the bar. I ducked back down just in time, hearing him mutter something under his breath. It was like he was talking to someone, but there was no one else there. I felt this rising panic, realizing that he might not be alone after all, that there might be others lurking somewhere in the darkness. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. With a deep breath, I crawled toward the end of the bar, praying he wouldn't notice. Just as I was about to make a break for it, I felt a sharp pain in my ankle. Something snagged my foot, and I fell forward, making a loud thud. The footsteps stopped. My heart was hammering, and I could hear him turn around. His breathing grew louder, closer. I scrambled up, yanking my foot free from whatever had caught it, and bolted for the door. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I reached the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the cool night air, running as fast as I could down the empty street. I didn't stop until I was far enough away that I couldn't hear anything behind me, until the bar was just a distant shadow. I called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. By the time they arrived, the intruder was gone. They found shattered glass, footprints, signs that someone had broken in, but no sign of him. They told me it might have been a random thief, but I knew, deep down, that it wasn't just a robbery. He knew I was there. He was looking for me. And I'll never forget that voice, that heavy, deliberate breathing as he circled the bar, knowing he was just inches away from finding me.